Okay, well, good evening, everybody. I'm Lacey. I'm on the Butte Environmental Council Board of Directors. I want to welcome everybody to our Food Systems and Climate Change Forum. So first, we'll start out with a quick overview of Butte Environmental Council. We're a nonprofit environmental organization based in Chico. We were founded in 1975, and BEC has contributed to provide the community with environmental education, information, and advocacy through programs and events. BEC's achievements are made possible by the active support of more than 900 valued members, staff, and board. On behalf of BEC, I want to thank everybody for attending this forum, whether it be in person or on Zoom. Thank you to Grub for letting us use their beautiful farm for this forum. Thank you to 𝗘𝗩𝗘𝗧 for helping us coordinate this event. He unfortunately couldn't make it this evening, but we're very grateful for all of the time he and others have contributed to putting this together. And tonight we're going to start off with hearing from 3 local people working towards increasing local food security. Then we'll take a quick break, hear from 2 more local experts, and move into breakout groups to discuss the application of topics presented during this forum. So without further ado, our first speaker tonight is Pamm Larry. She's the Director, Initial Instigator, and Chief Rabble Rouser of the Butte County Local Food Network. Pamm has been working on food sovereignty and security issues since 2011, primarily addressing policy issues on the state and the federal level. After the Camp Fire devastated our community, she decided to come home and focus on creating a strong local food system via the Butte County Local Food Network. She invites all who care about healthy food, people, and the planet to come join the network to create a strong local food system, one tasty bite at a time. So with that, I'll hand it over to Pamm.
Hello, everyone. Is here and even more folks on the Zoom. That's really very exciting. So who here has heard of the food chain reaction game? Have any of you heard of it? Okay, this was a simulation game, much like many of the simulation games that the big boys play, like governments and large corporations like Cargill and stuff like that. And they did this game in 2015 where they explored different AI computer models of different things that could impact the food system. And they played it out to 2030. And they put in a whole bunch of different things like climate impacts and pandemics and water issues and refugees and all sorts of wars and stuff. And what they came away was by the year 2026 to 2030, food prices would be going up about 398% within, from 2015. They foresaw massive shortages of food and a lot of people dying. And I find it very, very fascinating that COVID has done a great job of exposing a lot of the things that they talked about there. COVID really opened up our eyes to the fragility of the globalized industrial food system and its capacity to just fall apart. I don't know if you guys remember when it first started, there were huge supply chain issues. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were 2 still in restaurant stream, and then the other one is the stuff that you eat at home stream. And so things like milk or other things were packaged in these really large containers, but they had no way to pivot. Really quickly a gallon of milk. So there, I don't know if you remember, but there were millions of gallons of milk dumped. I watched videos of, of animals just being like killed and like thrown off of, conveyor belts into trucks because they couldn't. I've been watching and I never really noticed. I have a really special sparkling water called Mountain Spring Sparkle Water, and I can't believe the shelf was empty. So I went, they said they were having away. It was decided that I got to talk about the Debbie Downer and the zombie apocalypse talk here. But the good news is here in this country, we're just starting to see a little bit of the stuff. Food prices have gone up about 4% in 1 month, and people I listen to say we're slated to have about 10% more by the spring food increase. So that's kind of in line with their little simulation thing. Now I'm hearing about farmers are very, very nervous. I'm on a bunch of channels on this thing called Telegram, and I listen to a lot of different farmers. And they're talking about there's a worldwide shortage of fertilizer. China, Russia have stopped exporting it. India actually has the police, they hand out the fertilizer in India by the police. And although I'm not a huge fan of fertilizer, to say the least, but the potassium stuff, but our food system is based on this still. And things are falling apart very rapidly. We've got a shortage of propane. We've got a shortage of tractor parts. We've got a shortage of all sorts of stuff, natural gas, and that's all going to impact our food system. And everybody I listen to, and they could be wrong, but everybody I listen to says things are going to get really pretty fugly spring, and by winter and spring. And that, not to mention all the food shortage, the grain shortages because of, I hear conflicting stuff about that. Like one of them said that the U.S. had a great crop this year, and then others say not. There have been problems down in Brazil with their grains, problems over in China because of all the floods and stuff. China's buying up all sorts of stuff. Countries are starting to shut down their exports. The only country that I hear that isn't shutting down theirs is the United States. Keeps shutting out all sorts of food, and the farmers that I listen to say that that's really dumb because we're coming up upon a time where it probably would have been nice for us to keep our larders a little full. So that's the stuff that's kind of short term. We hope right now. It's not my job in this talk to talk about climate and water. There are other speakers going to talk about that, and that's going to impact our food system in the changing climate. But what I would like to talk about, and I'm really starting to speak out about this and hearing it more and more nationwide, is what about natural disasters and what about huge disasters that could happen to us? And I think that our area is one that should be most open to this, what I call the unthinkables. So we're doing this local food assessment, and Maria will be talking about that at the end. But my part was to do the food disaster part. And what I found out was pretty shocking and interesting, to say the least. So I started off by reading the federal, and then the state, and then the county disaster plans. And all of them focus mostly on disease and pests on the crops, contamination issues like what happens at a restaurant or something like that, supply chain disruptions such as we've been experiencing with COVID, and then acute natural disasters. All of the plans are predicated on assumptions. The first one is that Red Cross or somebody out there will come in and take charge. Okay, that's one of them. The second one is that we will have an energy system running to communicate with each other. There's an assumption that there will be government departments. All these things are very clearly delineated, but they're making these assumptions. They're making an assumption that there will be civil peace, that transportation will be working, that we'll have an internet, that it would be short term, and that food from one area will be in abundance and will be brought to the area that's in need. But one of my things is what happens when the planes, trains, and automobiles stop showing up? And I call this a ZAC, the zombie apocalypse collapse. So there are a bunch of different ways that I investigated that could be pretty severe. Could you tell me one about 5 minutes? I forgot that. Okay. Yeah. The first one is the nuclear war. Okay, these are the things that DHS and all those guys in FEMA are looking at behind the scenes. Nuclear attacks. So we've been kind of thinking about this for a while. Everybody's thinking it's kind of the threat is amping up a little bit. And even if there's just a limited exchange between India and Pakistan, they estimate that there would be a cloud that would impact crops for about 10 years. If the internet goes out, you can have a bunch of different kinds of, I'm sorry, this part's about cyber attacks. I don't know if you know, but this year so far, a number of different large food system things have been have had ransomware attacks. JBS, the largest meat supplier, and I forget there were a couple other really big ones. And the World Economic Forum predicts that we will have a cyber pandemic. You can have the most important one that I think about a lot is the destruction of the grid, and this can happen by EMP, either by terrorist attacks or by the sun. First, let's talk about the sun. There was a huge event called the 𝗘𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐠 event in 1859 that knocked out all of the transformers and everything across the nation. That wasn't fixed for a really long time. Scientists estimate that, some of them say that an event like that only happens about 500 years, and others say it happens about every 150 years. So if the last one was 1859, we might be due for one. A really big one happened in 2003 on the East Coast, where it knocked out a whole bunch of the electricity and transformers. Wow. There was and then last month, I don't know if you were watching, I was like, wonder if this is it. You know, there were a bunch of rolling flares that were happening, where they were warning that a lot of stuff was going to happen, but it didn't. So that was really kind of nice. Wow. In 2004, why is this significant? Well, the thing is if you don't have our whole society depends on the grid for electricity, for communication, for everything that we do. And it's not like when it's blasted out, you just turn a switch and it goes back on. They estimate that it could take 20, 30 years or longer to be able to repair that. In 2004, there was a commission. How much time?
Oh, 6 minutes.
6 minutes, oh, cool. There was a commission, and for the most part, the Department of Homeland Security has kind of ignored this kind of stuff because they say it's such a low probability, you know, very high impact, but very low probability. But there was all this other stuff going on, so maybe it wasn't worth even worrying about or planning for. But in 2019, people are starting to say that maybe we should be looking at this, just because our world is becoming so fragile and people are afraid of being attacked in different ways. In 2004, this commission determined that if there was a major grid outage in the United States, 90% of us would be dead in 1 year, between medical stuff, water issues, and food issues. So the really interesting part about all this is I called up a friend of mine who lives in Colorado, and I had seen him in a conference one time. He was telling me he was working with FEMA and the military for this kind of preparedness. And so I called him and interviewed him. And basically what he said was that the military told him, if something like that, an EMP attack happens, you are on your own. The military's job will be to protect our borders, will be to keep the current government in place, and will be there to keep civil peace. There is a mandate to protect infrastructure, and agriculture is a part of that, but we are not agriculture. Agriculture is things like bins and, you know, transportation and, you know, all that kind of fun stuff. There is no mandate. They feel no ethical responsibility to feed us. In addition to that, the federal government, through the state, through the county, can all come and say, they come to this farm, they can say, Franny, we're taking your food. Okay. So that's just what happens, that the government has the authority to decide how the food should be dispensed. So I said to him, like, so what do we do? And he's like, start talking in your communities. He said, first of all, like in Colorado, one of the things that they're doing, I mean, in Denver, is that the FEMA guy has gotten 300 bikes. I mean, just little things like this, remember low tech. They have, you know, regular typewriters that they've gotten, and reams and reams and reams of paper and typewriter ribbon, so that they can go out into the community and stuff like that. He said, talk to your neighborhoods and get up like signs, you know, like big structures where people can find a way to post stuff right there. He said, also find some kind of a way to communicate, because if the water's not good and, you know, and you're bringing in truckloads of water, you want the people you know about it, but how are you going to protect yourself? Because the minute the word gets out, you know, then we're going to have to find ways to deal with that. Do we share everything we have with everybody? you know, that maybe comes and says, hey, Chico's got a lot of water and food and we're starving, so we're just gonna go there. Or does it become like The Walking Dead, you know? I mean, who knows what we're gonna do, but the time to start talking about that stuff is right now. So I know that this is pretty scary, but one of the things that I wanna really bring up is just that if we, like little things like that, if we start coming together as a community and start talking, just talking about it, it'll be in our awareness, and we can start making little steps toward food sovereignty and food autonomy. We live in an amazing place with amazing soil. And I like when I was, I get really depressed about the climate thing once in a while, so I look at every map and every chart. And we're on the map as a place that people could survive, like even in the worst of times. So, I mean, we've got a lot going on for us. We've got amazing people around us, you know, everybody who's speaking here, Cindy, and everybody, you know, like we've got all this talent and this brain trust here. And I know that we have the capacity to figure things out. So my plea is for us this tonight and in an ongoing conversation to keep talking about the ways in which we can become more food secure and food sovereign. And if none of that stuff happens, which I'm hoping it never does, who cares? We've got this amazing thing that we've got, you know, we've got a community that's prepared, that feels safer. We train our kids how to grow their food and cook and all that stuff. They have a sense of belonging and importance in their society. We've got, we're talking to our neighbors, we're growing food together, and we're just having, you know, it'll just be great. So join us, join Beck, and I'm hoping hopefully we're gonna get word real soon about a large grant from the government, and if we get that, we're gonna be able to have the opportunity to come together over the course of a couple of years and create a vision for our area for for food sovereignty, and then begin a plan to get there. Thank you so much.
Nice. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Pam. So our next presenter is going to be Dr. Cindy Daly, the director and co-founder of the Center for Regenerative Ag and Resilient Systems. Dr. Daly is a professor within the College of Agriculture at Chico State and currently serves as the Rollins Endowed Professor for Environmental Literacy and the director for the Center for Regenerative Ag and Resilient Systems. Dr. Daly co-created the Regenerative Agriculture Initiative in 2016 and guided this program to center status in May of 2019. The new Center for Regenerative Ag and Resilient Systems is a consortium of interdisciplinary faculty and farmers who recognize the ecological benefits of regenerative farming practices, including water conservation, soil fertility, and carbon sequestration. The center's guiding principle is that agriculture, when done regeneratively, can be the solution to soil degradation and climate change. With that, I'll hand it to Dr. Daly.
Great.
Really, quite an honor. I've heard so much about Beck, a friend of mine. Fortunately left the university for bigger and better things. Really miss her already, didn't take long. But she's very highly of this particular organization, and I know you guys are doing some great things. And of course, we love Scott Grist, who is our manager for the organic vegetable program that we have at the University Farm, which is thriving. And so we're pretty excited about that. Yes. Nice job, Scott. Well, my job tonight was to try and follow Pam. Wow. I feel really fortunate that you guys are working on the things that you're working on, because a lot of that could come to pass. That's pretty scary, actually. I am a Mac person, so I'm going to be a little bit the return or space. Okay, great. Well, we started the center for a lot of these, reasons that that Pamm was talking about. The fact that, we live in a very fragile time. We have a lot of big issues that really impact, the sustainability of our food system. And frankly, conventional agriculture, and I was born and raised in conventional agriculture. My family farms, 5th generation. I mean, it's my people. But we're part of the problem right now. And we really have to think seriously about making some big shifts in production agriculture, because we have the potential to be the solution. And that's really where we need to position ourselves. And frankly, it's as much of a mind paradigm shift as it is a practice and farming paradigm shift. Ultimately, it comes down to people. Agriculture is a really big industry, as you all know. 47 billion in the state of California, 400 different types of crops. We've got 77,500 different farms. It's a big thing here in California. Important industry. Fruit and nuts are basically generated here, a little more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. California is going to be, a very climate challenged state. Agriculture, very sensitive to the impacts of climate change, so really adjusting the way we think about farming and the way that we practice. So temperatures warming, more severe weather, these are all things that this particular group knows well. It goes hand in hand with climate change. Agriculture is one of those very vulnerable programs that are going to be directly impacted. Yeah. That's quite a sight, huh? Yeah. The fact that I've actually seen this happen a couple of times in my lifetime is pretty significant. Collectively, you need to be thinking about that. We do not have unlimited water resources. 2 years of drought, and already 5,700 farmers in the Central Valley were without water. And when your entire livelihood is tied up in a perennial crop and you don't get water, you're devastated. You're done. You're out of business. You're bankrupt. That's how precarious the situation is. So, this is particularly devastating. That's not just the bankruptcy and not just the multi-generational farmers, that all that institutional knowledge going broke, but it's also all of the people that depend on that for jobs. All of us who like to eat. All of those kinds of things are impacted. So it is a domino type effect. Economically, pretty devastating. Roughly 2.7 billion for this last drought. Just in terms of water shortages, crop reductions, job loss, groundwater pumping, not even considering all the environmental impacts that are associated with that. Subsidence, all of the additional fuels that are burnt while you're pumping water from 1,000 feet underground. How ridiculous is that? We can do better. We absolutely can do better. Impacts of climate change on overall productivity. This is a projection chart that really shows the percent change in production over time as we start to warm. It doesn't look good. So even with all of the technology that we can throw at it, we're going to be producing less, and then less, and then less again as we warm. We can't throw any more fertilizer at it. We've got groundwater contamination. We've got surface water contamination. We've got 404 dead zones around the globe. Throwing more fertilizer at it will not counteract the decline in productivity that we're seeing due to climate change. Irrigated crops, which we have many of, most of the Central Valley, very dependent upon irrigation water, are going to be particularly sensitive. These particular photographs came out of a U.S. Department of Agriculture report on the impacts of climate on productivity. We're going to have a lot of change in frost-free days, a lot of change in the number of frost days. That has a real impact. That chill effect has a big impact on a lot of our perennial cropping systems that really depend upon that. Flowering and so on. So all of that is definitely going to have a big impact on us. Spacebar, Cindy. Keep going. Anyway, jumping back and forth. Whoever thought having two different computer systems was a good idea? I don't know. The number of days, consecutive dry days, I mean, we're seeing that, right? I mean, the drought was one thing, but you know, it's drier, more severe dry, longer. The fact that we can get a 4 or 5 inch rain now, you know, and then go 2 months without any water at all, it's really become real problematic. You can't really depend upon rainfall like we used to. This is such a treat this fall. I mean, we didn't know how to act when it started to rain. I mean, we just didn't know how to act. I've got green feet. I mean, I've got 6 inches of green feet, you know, and it's November, and we need to celebrate that. That's a really good thing, because that's not happened in the last 3 years. It's been pretty tough, pretty tough. Changes in hot nights, you know, you don't have a cool night, we're not going to be able to grow any grapes. And if that's the case, I like my wine. It's going to have an impact there. Now, I recognize the fact that, you know, a lot of that crop production can shift, but that's a perennial crop. And, you know, we're talking vines that are 10, 20, 30 years old that are producing some of the best wine. They may go by the wayside. And then we're talking about livelihoods there and jobs and really some pretty awesome Cabernet that, you know, are we going to shift all of this up into Oregon and Washington, Canada? Is that where we're going to start growing grapes? Perhaps, unless, you know, particularly if we don't get our handle on the situation. And I know I'm going way over time, so.
We still have 4 minutes.
Okay. Ultimately, you know, in the Central Valley, these are some of the big crops: alfalfa, safflower, maize, tomato. You'll see that the shift there is, you know, if we continue on the same trajectory with respect to the amount of emissions, you know, it's pretty severe there with the red bar. You know, particularly these more vulnerable crops, it's going to be almost impossible to grow cotton and safflower and wheat and rice. Those are big crops in California. The more, I guess, resilient crops like alfalfa and safflower will be okay, but that's assuming that we have normal water. And we're not going to have normal water. So all of this is going to have a big impact. And I love Pam's comments about COVID. That clearly pointed out some big holes in our food system. A lot of growers that, you know, I'm deeply connected to, dumping milk because they had no contract, because they didn't, you know, the schools they weren't in session, no restaurants were, all of that went away overnight. And a cow is milking, she doesn't stop milking because of COVID. So what do you do? And really the market pressure, this cheap food system that we have has really pushed these guys to get huge. Don't blame the farmer for that one. They are responding to market pressures and government policy. That's why we've got 10,000 cow dairies, is because we pushed them in that direction in order that they can stay profitable. You get big or you get out. And that's what happens when you have a pandemic. Pretty significant loss. 1 minute. Well, what the center is all about is trying to make production agriculture more resilient. We're into cover crops, we're into no-till, we're into compost applications, we're into crop rotation, we're into perennial cropping systems, sustainable adaptive grazing programs. We're trying to help producers make that transition. And we do that together with our partners. We have NRCS, the RCDs, we have the UC Cooperative Extension, We have a number of project partners out there that are all about this and really trying to go at it in terms of transitioning production agriculture into a more resilient form of production agriculture. And we have a new healthy soil program that they just put $75 million into this year. So we're pretty excited. If you happen to be a grower and you're interested in really putting your toe in the water on cover crops or on compost applications, or maybe even agroforestry or silvopasture, any of those kinds of production practices, they're paid practices to get you started. So we're very much promoting this. We're one of the technical service providers for the California Department of Food and Agriculture. We can hook you up, so come and see us. And thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And I apologize, I'm double duty tonight. I've got 2 events, so I'm gonna have to run. I've got a whole pavilion full of organic dairy producers tonight.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Jared,
So I emailed it to everyone.
I know, but I don't know whose email is open right now.
Thank you, Cindy. And our next presenter is going to be 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐠𝐢𝐴, Carbon Farm Planner. Jared is a carbon farm planner for a conservation district in Sacramento Valley. He works with farmers to identify opportunities to enhance carbon sequestration and soil health through conservation planning.
Everyone. All right, well, Becky is pulling up the presentation. Let's see, I guess I'll ask some questions to people. I gave a lecture in a geography class yesterday. Asked a bunch of questions, it's kind of fun. Yeah, so I guess I'll start with what do you all think is an example of a carbon farming practice? No one has any ideas? No-till. Yeah, that's one of them for sure. Yeah, so no-till is one of them. Click there. Yeah, so there are several of them are listed here. So yeah, island cropping, no-till, planting cover crops, spreading compost. There's a whole bunch of them. And I love this graphic. It was created by the folks at the Carbon Cycle Institute and Fibershed, 2 organizations really pushing regenerative agriculture and carbon farming in California. The drawing depicts what a farm can do to enhance carbon capture, as well as how it integrates into the larger society. Here showing the climate beneficial clothing, something that Fibershed is really promoting as a way to actually produce things that are beneficial to the climate. That is, there's more carbon being sequestered by the production of that thing than there is emitted from its production. So conservation planning, that's what I do for an RCD. And so this is all of the different conservation plans that the USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service, offers for farmers and ranchers. And then at the bottom, carbon farm plans, that is what I do. It's one of the newer types of conservation plans. It's picking up a lot of steam because of its focus on climate change and its focus on carbon, and its inclusion of several other components of conservation.
Oh,
Oops.
sorry, Jared.
So what do you do?
This button.
The front, okay. All right, so why is carbon so important? So this image is from the United States Department of Energy, and it shows the global carbon cycle. So it shows how, there's a bunch of carbon stored in the fossil carbon. It's kind of hidden by that. Soil carbon is the storage, the pool for it. The ocean is a major pool for it. And then it shows how it cycles. So it cycles to the ocean. It cycles to the plants through photosynthesis, and there's excess in the atmosphere as a result of fossil fuels, cement, and land use change, 3 major drivers of climate change and 3 major sources of carbon emissions. And so the reason this is so significant, the carbon farming, is because this is a good quote from the IPCC showing that climate change resulting from CO2 emissions is irreversible on a multi-century to millennial timescale, except in the case of large net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. Basically showing that we've locked ourselves into climate change and there's no undoing that except for removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And geoengineering technology, unfortunately, can't do that, or fortunately so, that we do have a beautiful planet that has plants on it. And plants do that really well with photosynthesis. And through intelligent management of plants and through intelligent management of our soils, we can mitigate climate change this way. All right, so carbon farm planning. I'll give you a brief overview of what it looks like. So it's me working with a farmer or rancher, going over what kind of goals they have for the operation, what kind of resource concerns they have, or opportunities to enhance their resources. And so for a carbon farm plan, that chief resource concern is carbon. And so at every step of the planning process, we're looking at carbon, being conscious of carbon, and looking at how to reduce carbon emissions and increase carbon capture. And then so a resource assessment, so looking at the land, looking at the soil, looking at the hydrology and the wildlife on the site, and what the producer's goals are in relation to those things, and what the farmer could do to improve those resources. And then the fun part, identifying carbon farming opportunities, looking at the carbon farming practices, looking at how those address the resource concerns, and doing the mapping work for where those can be implemented on the farm. And then the technical part, getting into quantification of carbon sequestration. So there's incredible tools out there today called Comet Planner, Comet Farm, where you can actually quantify CO2 equivalent emissions reductions as a result of various carbon farming or soil health practices. And then implementation of the practices and monitoring of it. All right, and so ultimately, the carbon farm planning process is trying to create carbon farmers, people that are growing their food, their commodities, livestock, whatever it is, but are thinking about carbon as they do so they can, so it's an educational process, not just about what the opportunities are, but about the significance of carbon in agriculture, so that they keep carbon in mind when they're managing the land. All right, and so I did the first carbon farm plan in Glenn County, and so I'm going to go over some of the practices identified in that plan. And I'm not going to read them all, maybe I will for the significant ones, but at the top here, it shows the quantified CO2 equivalent emissions reduction as a result of practice implementation. So the first practice, I think someone mentioned it, cover crops. So as you can see here in this walnut orchard on the left, there's no carbon cycling occurring when the leaves are off the tree. There's no carbon capture occurring. The orchard floor is left bare. The tree is dormant. And then you look at this orchard here on the right. Picture taken on the same day with all of these plants growing within the tree rows. All of these plants capturing carbon, pumping it into the soil, keeping it in their organic matter, and then returning it to the soil once the organic matter of the cover crops decomposes. All the while just stimulating good stuff going on in the soil for crop fertility. Another one that someone mentioned was no-till. So tillage kind of causes carbon to go up into the sky. It oxidizes organic matter, and so figuring out ways to reduce that is valuable for carbon farming. And I love this picture of the soil food web. It just shows how sunlight relates to plant growth, and then that energy from the sun and that carbon is a form of that energy goes to support all the diversity of life in the soil. All right, mulching is another one. So spreading organic matter on top of the soil. This specific farmer I'm working with spread 14 tons of almond shells per acre in his orchard. So it's a lot of organic matter, which is serving to blanket the soil, protect the soil from wind erosion, and most significantly is improve water use efficiency. So instead of having the water evaporate from the soil, there's a nice thick layer of mulch there, keeping the water in there. And so, yeah, this is compatible with cover crops, and I'll explain that in a bit. And so animal integration is another carbon farming practice. So rather than managing cover crops with a tractor and a mower or a flamer or a weed eater or whatever the tool may be, using livestock to manage that. And that actually has benefits for carbon sequestration, benefits for soil health, and emissions reductions by the result of the reduced fuel use. Compost application, this is a huge one. So just spreading a layer of compost, using compost both for the nutrients that it provides for crop production, but also most significantly for the energy it provides to the soil ecosystem. So compost has a lot of carbon in it. And that carbon, as I mentioned before, is what fuels the soil ecosystem. And so by spreading compost, not only are you adding carbon right there, but you're also stimulating biological activity in a significant way, which then increases carbon sequestration. And so the quantifier, Comet Planner, says that this can reduce 4.5 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per acre per year, which is a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions. All right, another practice, nutrient management. So rather than meeting fertility needs with synthetic fertilizer use that's dependent upon fossil fuels, meeting fertility needs with organic sources, such as compost, such as cover crops, such as organic fertilizers as needed. And I include both of these pictures here because this is a fertilizer plant on the left. So that fertilizer plant is utterly dependent upon fossil fuels to create the synthetic nitrogen and synthetic fertilizers that are used in conventional production. So that's one model. That's the dominant way food's produced in this country. And then the other model is using. So I will say about the fertilizer plant, the fossil fuels are derived from ancient sunlight that was on this planet thousands and millions of years ago to form these fossil fuels. Whereas in the organic system, or the system without synthetic fertilizer, it's running off of current sunlight. You're getting fertility from compost produced with energy from our lifetime, fertility from the cover crops, rather than from the fossils. So yeah, this graphic, I really love it because it puts carbon at the top. It says soil carbon is the keystone of all soil physical, chemical, and biological processes and properties. So it's really integral to healthy soil. All right, another practice is whole orchard recycling. So at the end of an orchard's productive life, instead of piling it all up and burning it, like this person in the San Joaquin Valley is doing, the better alternative is to chip it all up and then incorporate that in the soil before replanting. And that has significant carbon sequestration benefits, soil water holding retention benefits, all kinds of awesome stuff for the soil, awesome stuff for carbon sequestration, but also great for air quality, as you can imagine, and great for keeping black carbon out of the atmosphere. So yeah, that's really awesome. Field border, so instead of letting the land next to the orchard just kind of lie bare, just planting it with, this is a multi-species cover crop they planted, but just planting it with vegetation so that'll be permanent and that'll be capturing carbon year round. All right, just about done with them. This is another one. So combustion system improvement, instead of using diesel fuel to pump the water from the ground to irrigate the trees, converting to an electric pump powered by solar panels. And so yeah, this reduces like 78 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So it's a huge way just to reduce the emissions of a farm, just powering things with renewable energy. All right, so what does this mean? I showed you kind of the quantifiable carbon emission benefits. But looking at the overall impact, we're looking at climate change adaptation and mitigation, improving the conditions for life above and below the soil surface, improving water utilization and nutrient cycling, and resilience in the soil, on the farm, in the community, in the valley, and in the world. And so this graphic kind of shows what happens as you start managing to improve carbon capture and improve soil organic matter, which comes from the enhanced carbon capture. So you're improving aggregation and infiltration of water, water and nutrient holding capacity, water and air quality, and then ultimately productivity. And so in the carbon farm plan, it also looks at what's the cumulative impact over implementation of the plan. So over 20 years of implementation, this carbon farm plan, or this farm can sequester as much as 14,447 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Wow. Just on one 90-acre walnut farm, just one farm. And just to put that into perspective, that's about 3% of the emissions of the city of Q2 annually. So if you start to really imagine scaling up this carbon farming to, you know, times 10, times 100, valley-wide, like the whole farmland being managed to increase carbon capture, we can significantly mitigate climate change. All right, and that's all I have for you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jared.
Thanks, everybody. We're reconvening from our break. Welcome back. The second half of tonight. Welcome back to the second half of tonight's Food Systems and Climate Change Forum, which we have two more presenters, and then we'll have a breakout session. So our next presenter is Eric Wright, a freelance restoration specialist Eric has focused on native restoration and regenerative ag practices along the Sierra Nevada foothills of California for over 12 years. He attributes his skills today to a diverse work history on the land, from caretaking at a Valley Oak Preserve where he first learned native nursery and propagation skills, to irrigation and pruning work in the Valley Orchards, to working for several, then eventually managing an organic vegetable farm, as well as participating in internships, workshops, and seminars on regenerative ag. Locally, Eric has worked for Butte County Local Food Network as an ag research assistant for their local food assessment, is an active student of traditional ecological knowledge through Ali Mader's Night of the 𝐷𝗡𝐻𝑢𝐻𝑡𝑢 tribe, and works in restoring land and teaching these skills on the burn scars of the 2018 Camp Fire and the 2020 Bear Fire. So with that, I can hand over to Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, BEC and Butte County Local Food Network for having me and everyone in between here. I actually came into Butte County just before the campfire. In 2018, I was looking for ag work and got into an organic farm. And then the fire happens, and it really kind of galvanized my direction in towards basically restoration and regenerative work, and looking towards climate adaptation strategies. And I felt that Butte County had a really great potential for this type of activity. So for this presentation, I'd like to just kind of talk about my work with Butte County Local Food Network as a researcher, and having the on-the-ground interviews and reporting of local farms and farmers, ranchers, and just kind of getting this general scope and idea of what's going on in the county. So part of the local food assessment, I provided the ag report. So that's the bulk of what I'll be talking about today.
Just step back a little bit for the camera.
And also, hi. Hello, sorry, I'm here now. So yeah, I can't share it all within 10 minutes, but I'll do it my best. Let's start with the campfire. And according to the Ag Commissioner, about 40,000 acres of ag land was impacted during the campfire. Now, if you look at the numbers in 2018, where there was about 640,000 acres of crop and rangeland at the time in Butte County, 40,000 doesn't seem like too much, it's about 6%. However, when you look at the fire scar itself, the campfire, which was about 150, right? Yeah, 150,000. That's over a quarter of that acreage that farmland was impacted within that burn scar. So in other words, people along the ridge, there's a lot of incentive for farmers, ranchers, beekeepers, and so on to have a restoration practice, a sustainable practice, and they are very well impacted by climate effects. So in terms of like rangeland and ranching, one of the biggest impacts would be the forage. So as conditions dry out, as fire conditions increase, as land is degraded through erosion and so on, as the holding capacity for diversity in those plant systems decreases, you limit your amount of forage. So it forces ranchers into a tough position where they may be thinking, if they're on the ridge, because they can't irrigate their water, you can't really irrigate 200, 300, 500 acres of land, right? They have to make tough decisions about how they manage their herbs, how they manage their grasslands and their soil, and whether they can continue. Like some decisions could be am I just going to keep my breeding stock this season and just hunker down? Same too were the impacts of the beekeepers. So instead of, you get the same impacts with the decrease of soil, water, and precipitation, where the nectar stores and all the wildflowers are decreasing along the traditional hills where people would overwinter or keep their bees for honey production. So although beekeepers they're in high demand for coming into the winter and spring for pollination down in the valley, there's always going to be a demand, especially as tree crops still continue to increase in acreage. There's no home for them as climate dries locally. So they're forced to say, okay, well, am I taking my hives to Montana? And then we were talking about the frost-free days and how they're decreasing. You also need a good dormancy for your beehives. Otherwise, they're going to go through their reserves and they're not going to have honey production and get sick. So there's a lot of complications involved. Besides the impacts of, kind of what Pamm and so on was talking about, the supply chain, logistics, there's customers lost during the campfire as they relocated. And those are just kind of the general problems with that direct disaster. So as we understand too, with the campfire, there was an increased rain event, and there's going to be these stronger hot, dry, wet, cold cycles of push and pull, and it's just very hard to manage those swings. So what next? Well, speaking from my interviews, the voices of farmers, they kind of wanted to speak out about certain things, and they were looking for more outreach and education. They want more awareness of the impacts of farming and the importance of managing land to be able to have a participate in a regenerative way. And that brings up one topic about the beekeepers and the ranchers in the ridge, is that they are basically the barometer of how climate change can impact and be a consequence down into the lower elevations. Because up in the higher elevations, your wells go drier first. You lose a lot of your soil water as it's higher elevation. And you basically start seeing the stress factors early on through the season relative to places where there's water flowing between you, down in the valley. So that was one concern. They want more outreach, education, involvement with that. And I see, I came in feeling a little humbled with all the information, and having Sydney and Jared come out and just say these really important things that are happening to help revolutionize agriculture. Now, the farmers that I've spoken to feel like there needs to be a bridge between that. So in other words, some of them would feel that don't penalize, incentivize. In other words, there's extra steps and extra labor and extra effort to prove that you're doing the sustainable regenerative efforts. Whereas with conventional farms, they can basically, as long as they keep this and that going, they can effectively run with environmentally irresponsible practices and not get penalized as long as they're not blatant about it, right? So when you're going into organic certification, when you're going into different regenerative practices, receiving grants, easements, rewards, there's just these extra steps to demonstrate that you're doing this sustainable work. And there's not enough retroactive involvement showing how long multi-generation farms have been doing carbon sequestration and rebuilding regenerative, there's not rewards for this encultured sustainability quite yet. So, and they've had other solutions like just being more participatory, having decentralized distribution, having mobile markets, having kitchens, like community kitchens, so you could do your processing for fruits and so on. And in general, just increasing the partnerships. Like that's one of the biggest things, because there's a lot of great resources here. There's an incredible amount of resources, and there's a lot of agencies from private, nonprofit to government to whatever that are very invested and involved, but there's not too much cross dialogue going on. And it seems like from the farmers' perspective, they don't feel like they're being heard as much. So before I go, I just wanted to touch on a bit about the Central Valley, and that's where I got a lot of my training. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, down there, there was a lake called 𝗘𝗩𝗘𝗡𝗧 Lake. It was the largest land feature in California. And it was basically fished out, drained, and diverted into cotton fields along with the rivers. This was a land where old timers would say, well, I can dig a post in the ground and it'll just geyser up with water. Or I could walk from Visalia to Fresno under the shade of oak trees constantly. And now it's effectively a desert. So what I'm seeing here is that there's a lot of bounty here with water and just a lot, it's just a very rich, diverse place, as Pamm was bringing, but there may not be enough realization that we're so fragile and that we could be very much like the Central Valley if we continue this way. Thank you.
So our next presenter is Maria Giovanni, an associate professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Science at CSU Chico. Maria's career has focused on understanding and assessing the factors underlying food choice, particularly as they impact human health. She's conducted research in industry, government, and academia, including sensory perception and marketing as they influence behavior, cross-cultural food preferences, and enhancing the quality of fruits and vegetables to support both healthy eating and healthy farming. Her current research includes developing meaningful courses for students to realize the impact of their food choices on the climate crises and the quality of food produced within regenerative agriculture methods. She's an associate professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Science at CSU Chico, near her roots in Glenn County, where her grandfather had a dairy.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you guys for having this. I think it's really great. And put this down here.
Which one is it?
Did you find it? It's that one at the top.
Thank you.
And my work with, I'm going to be talking about our local food assessment that's been mentioned a few times. So as I was introduced, I do teach at Chico State, and this work I'm doing is kind of ex officio, but it certainly overlaps with the work with what I do at Chico State. And I have become really passionate about helping people understand. Yeah, that's fine. And I just hit enter, right?
Yeah, if you want, or I
Okay.
can.
Yeah, okay. So, so what is a local food assessment? Well, I think Pam mentioned we've been wanting to do this for a long time. I can't even remember when we met, but like I said, my whole goal was to leave my hometown, and here I am back 30 plus years later. So don't think you can't go home again. You do. And now my cousins, per what Cindy said, my cousins have sold all the cows, which is really sad. I mean, that didn't come up, but just the emotional ties that we all had to have to the dairy. But now they grow milk on trees. They don't like it when I say that because they have almonds and walnuts. So anyway, Pam and I met, and we have seen this in other places where there are communities that come together and say, okay, what is our food system? What does it comprise of? So, you know, all kinds of neat graphics, but basically we're looking at the food system very holistically, all the way from the soil and the seed through the eater. But I'm also really interested, I look at eating very holistically. Maybe it's my cultural background where, you know, if you don't have enough food, you're going to burn in hell because it's a mortal sin, right? So being Italian and Portuguese. So we got to have enough food. It's got to be good. Everybody's got to sit at the table and have a good time. So it's looking at that whole cycle. And the idea is, okay, I agree with Pam when we have the zombie apocalypse, and as we know with the trains, planes, and automobiles stuff coming, are we going to be able to feed ourselves? So the start of any time you do something like that is to say, okay, what's our baseline? Where are we starting at? And so when we talk about a food system, again, part of this has been helping people to think really broadly. So I'm going to kind of bookend with what Pam did in terms of what we can do, and then tie in also with the other speakers. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so Eric really touched on, I am going to talk about what we've learned in our baseline food assessment. And I do want to start by saying we really are looking for comments from all of you. We're looking for more partners, either to provide data or to provide insights. Eric did a great job interviewing farmers. One of the things we have in this assessment, it's about 75 pages right now. So it's pretty long, but it's very searchable. And so we pulled out several of his interviews and called them case studies, because he really does go into depth on many of the issues the farmers are facing. So when we look at production, we just look at all the areas of things going on with the land, and he brought up some of the statistics that we have. One of the things that came out in the report, and there were, 6 of us, I think, at one time working on the report. So and so right now we have a draft out to what we called our core team, but if any of you would like to receive it, you can just, I've got cards, you can email me. I'm happy to send you the link. One of the things we found is, even though it seems like very recently we've had, oh my gosh, there's been, you know, drought and there's been the fires, these changes have been going on for a long time, where we're losing more water, we're losing more land to production. And that's really important to me, because I end up going into food science because I can't grow food. I have a black thumb, so but I like to cook. So I need all of you to grow food, otherwise I'm in trouble. So as Eric said, our report looked a lot at how land is being used, labor issues, which that's another thing that's affected this is labor. Just Pam and I talked with some people at Butte County Office of Education today, with the director of the nutrition services, and one of the issues they're facing is that they can't get enough lunch ladies to make lunch, okay, or lunch guys. So everywhere we're seeing labor shortages, and as was mentioned by Pam, parts for equipment and education. So I really view myself as a connector to help connect some of the things like Eric was saying. So we've got production. We have a really great section on that. Trying to think of what else is in that section. Also, a lot of quite a bit of good summary information about policies and land use types of regulations. One things that came up was we have a little section on urban farming. And one of the things we learned is that the different communities, Ridley, Oroville, Chico, Paradise, we all have different ordinances around what can you grow and what can you sell it, can you give it away, what can you do with it. So we really believe that there are some things that we can really do locally. So if we can look at how can we improve urban agriculture in these communities, those are the kinds of quick, relatively easy, I don't want to say they're quick, nothing with government's quick, but they're relatively easy or we can begin working on and making change. So we also looked at agritourism and how that's impacted farms that have done agritourism. And when I feel like I'm missing one, urban farming. I'm looking at Pam, but anyway.
Well, historical, like what we used to grow here versus what happened.
Yeah, when the county first started collecting data in the late 1930s, wheat was the #1 crop. Right, so we had much more diversity. And also another really interesting statistic is just how we have a number of small farms, a pretty large percentage of small farms, but they only farms, I think it's 6% of the land, or maybe it's 16%. I didn't bring my notes. So very small percentage of the land farmed by a lot of people like Franny and Lee and other farms. So, and one of the statistics or one of the projections that was calculated is if we had about 700 10-acre farms in Butte County, okay, which we could, that's not that many acres, we could basically produce enough produce to feed everybody a pound a day. And I don't know how many of you eat a whole pound of produce today, but not too many people. Pam did, okay. So yeah, so we really could feed ourselves, but we also realized we don't. Okay, go ahead and hit that. Thank you. Okay, whoops. Oh, go ahead, hit it again. All right, so processing. We looked a little bit into processing. That's kind of my background, is what do you do after the food is harvested? I spent my first job was in tomato processing in Woodland. So anyway, lots of fun. But one of the things I'm really passionate about is teaching people to understand how to preserve food themselves. So we looked at, we didn't get a lot into processing. We don't have a lot of processing here in Butte County, and most of what we do have is shipped out of the county. And I was going to mention too around production, just the again, we have fewer crops as far as the different types of crops, but also really a huge decline in animal production. So we've really gone down in animal production, and we have one dairy left in Butte County, and his milk goes out of the county. Well, I actually, with Scott still there, so I forgot to mention the organic dairy on the farm, but that milk is shipped out of the county too. So so we don't have that. Glenn County still has a few, so we'll be happy hit up Glenn County. So okay, thanks. Okay, the next part of the food system is distribution. So this is where we get into, okay, now you've processed and you've harvested the food. Distribution is a huge issue, as was mentioned, with the difficulties that are going on. So how can we distribute more locally? And interestingly, I'm thinking to our Pam in my conversation today with Butte County Office of Ed, they do everything through contracts with suppliers. So being able to contract with Franny and Lee isn't part of their mode of operation. So part of the change is going to be how do we change the way people are doing business? So looking into different aspects, but this is again getting that food to people. If any of you, a lot of you work with our farmers or work with farmers can't be at markets all the time. So for a while the answer was, well, let's just have more farmers markets, but farmers have to farm. So that takes a lot of time and energy. So what are other things we can do? And part of this that's come up is some of the things like the mobile farmers market that Butte County Local Food Network has, where it's buying food. So that's another part of this whole distribution is, wow, it's great, we can give away food, but you know, everything comes with a cost. And so being able to buy and provide food and sell it in various places where they currently don't have access. Okay. Thank you. And so the next part is the consumers, all of us. So we looked at a variety of, we looked at two areas under kind of the consumers and the eaters. We looked under, you know, what's going on in terms of retail and food service. So we don't have a lot of information on schools. We're going to be adding that. So again, this is a baseline report where we really worked over the summer and the schools were in session. But also, oops, that's the end of my time here. Also looking at things like community gardens. So who's growing their own food. We tried to think of a way to find out how many gardens are in the county, how many people garden, but that's a huge undertaking. But one of the issues we know with BEC is to have more community garden support. So how can we get municipalities and private landowners to provide more for gardens? And a huge part of this also is education. So go ahead and go to the last one. The last one is waste. And again, the impact of the food industry, well, the whole food system has a huge impact on waste. So how do we look at things to do? And something as simple as composting. I know that was mentioned by Jared.
I can compost. I actually can compost. So yay. So actually I've gotten the best produce I've ever grown out of my compost pile. So, but even if somebody in an apartment can compost. So we have trainings going on in Chico, and again, we're really looking for partnerships. So go ahead and go there. Okay, so what do we want to do next? We want to spring into action. So our timeline is, again, where we have this draft report out. We want anybody and everybody who wants to give comments on it to do that. And then go ahead and, there's another pop up there. So what we're planning to do then is, oh, they didn't go. There it is. So we need everybody at the table, again, to share information. So finding out ways that we can share information and develop partnerships is really huge. One of the things I personally hope comes out of this is that we can get, if you're familiar with cooperative extension, we can get another advisor to some more support, because that's one of the things, just kind of what like Jared does. That's one of the key things they do, people like Jared does, is they really help connect people. So like I said, and if you're interested in the Center for Regenerative Ag, you can email me. Cindy's really busy, but I'm down the hall from their office and I can go bug them. All right, so thank you very much.
Yay.
Well, everybody, that brings us to the end of our panelists, but now we will start our breakout discussions. So now that we've heard from all of these awesome speakers, we're going to break out into small groups to discuss things. I think with this group, we can have, I would say, 2 to 3 groups, somewhere between 5 and 10. And if you're attending on Zoom, we do have a Zoom facilitator who will lead your group. Okay, so groups of no more than 5, everybody.
And then if you're cold, you have to do like a couple lunges before you sit down, or just do squats while you're talking.
So the theme of our breakout discussion is around the question, how do we apply the topics presented at this forum as an on an individual, local, and regional scale? So we have 2 topics for everybody to discuss, and we'll have about 7 or 8 minutes per topic. And you'll have these in your group with your note taker as well. First of which is visioning a resilient food system and ways to create farms. So your perfect ecotopia of food production, abundance, and access. And the second topic will be, how do we get there? Creative ways where we can start working together now to address food security. This might include things like, how can we creatively support local food production and access without waiting on the government? New models of supporting community that grows food together, including farms and gardens, free the food stands, where we share extra food with each other. And how can we support local food production and improve access in Chico's food deserts? So with that, we will split into groups of no more than 5, and you'll have a facilitator in your group.
Okay.
And just for the people online, you all are going to stay in your main room on the Zoom, and you'll go ahead and have your discussion there with each other. So go ahead and unmute, turn your video on, and have some good conversation amongst yourselves.
And go.
Hey, everybody on the Zoom call. You want to unmute and have this conversation?
Hey, Steve.
Hey.
Hi, everybody.
Ryan.
Hello, hello.
Donna, Caitlin's in person. Aaron and Grub Host wouldn't join us, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, there you are. Hello, nice to meet you virtually. All right, the first question, folks, is visioning a local food system. And I think the idea, oh, thank you for this slide. What does a resilient food system look like? And what would be your ideal? Since there's only a few of us, I can just popcorn. Would you like to go first, Aaron?
Yes, I can. I was just, my light went off here, so I was in the dark. Yeah, I can. So I think, with working with BEC and just my experience in work, in food security work, as far as a resilient food system, I really see it being a two-part system, kind of one part as back in kind of the war days when we had to have victory gardens and things like that. I see something like that as prioritizing community garden space, collaboration on practices of growing your own food for those that don't have their own space, and then filling in those spaces, especially in public spaces, with food production, as well as private space and things like that. So I kind of see it as a two-part system as far as just that being part of how you do landscaping, whether that's through public policy and incentives for people to do that, as well as a combination of kind of what was talked about today, where it's that smaller scale regenerative ag farming, so that basically we're not relying on the entire food system, but it's kind of a combination of those two things. So that's kind of that's the utopia, I suppose, in my mind.
Awesome. So would you say with the victory garden concept and like edible landscaping, like it's part policy, but also would you say or agree that it's we need to enact like a culture shift and make it like culturally acceptable or a norm or like a duty of everybody to produce food?
Yeah, I think that comes along with it. And so that might relate to, that's part of education in every, grade and things like that. So it would definitely have to be built into the culture in different ways. But at least I'm from a realm of where policy, environmental change, and system change really basically are, you got to have those to make sure that we have guidelines for kind of how you move forward. And without those things, if we have those things in place at all at that time, that is an important thing to have. So yeah, I think it really parts on that incentivizing those, people to have those things. But then, yeah, you're right. There's a cultural aspect as well, for sure.
Ryan, how about you? What is your ecotopian vision for local food?
It has a lot in common with what Aaron just said. I think, front and backyards are like kind of the low-hanging fruit, and I don't have much to add. You guys kind of covered what I was thinking. Get more people involved on small scale, build community, right? Get people to learn from each other and share the produce with each other.
So systems, kind of like the last presenter talked about, distribution systems and how do we like decentralize and make like equitable distribution systems.
Totally, yeah. And how do we, just sort of trade with each other, right? Like give and build community that way. Like I don't think we need to have, a co-op grocery store if everyone's, trading in their neighborhood. All my tomatoes basically failed, but I have tomatillos for days, right? So I could, trade with my neighbor. And that would be pretty ideal for me.
That's a great anecdote to add to your point. Tom Bartles joined us. Tom, would you like to jump in on this discussion?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Oh yeah, oh there you are, you just moved up. Yeah, so the question is, what is your ecotopia type vision for local food? Like, what do you imagine would be the ideal if we had food sovereignty and food security in the region?
Well, I joined late, but I'll jump in on the question because it's a good one. There's 40 million acres of lawns out there, which is a good starting point, being the largest irrigated crop, and it's over chemicalized, and there's ample irrigation on site with hose bibs, and it's ready to go. It's just that there's a skill set that's not embedded in the general public, and they don't quite understand the nuances of growing food. But in the ultimate food growing scenario, I think half of the block, or ultimately the whole block, anybody with lawns would rip them out and start growing food. I mean, that's utopia in that respect. And there are certain countries doing that. I hiked in Spain a couple of years ago, and multitudes of neighborhoods where there's hundreds of gardens, just all the backyards are growing food, and they just share food and have really good community get-togethers, and it's all hyper local. And we don't do that here in the States, but we should. And so there's an enormous educational ramp to get people involved in that. And I've been working on that side of things for a number of years, but long way to go.
Great. I kind of picked up something from what everybody said. And it's kind of, we all obviously are here at this event, so we all think somewhat similarly about our food system. But I imagine something very similar as well, where front lawns are converted and neighbors coordinate so that, not everybody has their own plum tree and peach tree, and then they have too many plums and peaches, but everybody can kind of diversify. So I'm thinking even like transitioning to suburbs, and you have these cul-de-sacs with front lawns, and converting that basically into this like semicircular food forest that's managed collectively and is built around like a culture of sharing and cooperation. And it's a beautiful vision. Was there anybody else? Nobody else piped up at the beginning. So Donna, Bryce, did you have some comments?
Sure. I think you all have fantastic ideas about food production on a local scale, so I don't need to talk about that. But I think the other thing is like abundance and access. Having like neighborhood markets, or even like street markets would be maybe one thing I would add to that. But you kind of all got it.
One more minute to wrap up this conversation before we move to the next topic.
Uh-oh. How many minutes was that?
One more minute, she said,
Okay.
which is perfect
Everyone
because
else
I think
go.
we're just wrapping it.
I'm good.
Yeah, I have my brain's turning, so maybe I'll take some notes and then submit them, to Caitlin or whatever, or Pam.
Yeah, and
or
I've been
whoever.
taking some notes too.
Yeah, definitely lots of opportunities for culture shift, as well as networking folks together. And I like what Tom, I think it said about like potlucks, like everybody grows some food in their own garden and then everybody gets together and shares it. Could lead to some neighborhood cohesion as well. Any last thoughts, 20 seconds from anybody? Okay, topic 2. Now we kind of have an idea of what we want to do, and I kind of segued in my comment. How do we get there? How can we work together? And specifically, one of the important parts of this is that like petitioning government and stuff is one thing that we can do, but it's not adequate, and we really need to find ways of networking ourselves to provide this. Like Pam said at the very beginning, there is no plan to ensure that everybody gets fed when shit hits the fan. So let's just do another round robin on this topic here that you should be able to see on your screen, like new models of supporting community agriculture. How do we improve access? Like, how do we actually implement this vision? Ryan, do you want to start this time?
Not really, but I will. I don't have a lot of insight here. I don't know how we get to there from here. I think that, the work of BEC is important. The work of the local food network is important. And I think, other than trying to lead by example and ripping up my own front yard, which is still a work in progress, I don't know how to get everyone else on board to do stuff like this. And you really need the community buy-in, right? We can't just like impose this. It needs to be freely chosen by everyone. So I don't know. I'd love to hear what other folks think.
Sure. Tom, you had brought up kind of that idea of the potlucks, and that stuff. Would you like to offer your thoughts on how do we get from where we are to our vision?
Well, I think part of it's going to be getting local farmers involved. I mean, depending on where you are, I'm in Colorado, but the local farm systems are set up for larger markets and typically out-of-state markets, or they're not serving the local region in direct food production, and that needs to change. So we need system change to help ensure the farmers have a market that's consistent so they can rely on it year after year, and then they can divert their land to growing for local schools and local homeowners, or whatever it is, whatever target group they have. And after that's done, they can then mix with other people growing food in their backyards, and kind of, it's not just going to be one group, but getting everybody involved. And it's going to take a little bit of education for the general public to understand how much food you can actually grow in your local food shed, right, in your watershed. And one kind of demonstration we're doing here I work with a local community food network, and we're trying to give the school system an idea. If you could feed every student in the entire school system in your county, let's say, a carrot a day all year long, just grown locally, there would be one farmer growing all the carrots for every student to have a full organic carrot from their local town every single day of the year that they're in school. How much land would that take? And in our case, we're about 45,000 people in the county. It would take about 1/8 of an acre of land, which is a surprisingly small piece of land. So in 1/8 of an acre, we could grow enough carrots just from one farmer to give every student a carrot a day, all for the entire season. So then you start extrapolating, well, in your climate zone, what can you grow? How could you start those markets opening for farmers to support the school system, and, branch out from there? But it's public education, and they need a demonstrative proof that you can actually do it so they can get behind it, because people are a little tenuous. They like the supermarkets and they think they're secure, but they're not actually that secure. After 3 days of absence of food, people start getting a little wanky. So that's the kind of the stuff that I wake up at night trying to figure out.
Excellent. Aaron, how about you? What are your thoughts on how to enact this culture shift?
Yeah, happy to add in. I think I'd add to what Tom was saying, actually. Right when we talk about, I know we kind of talked about like when shit hits the fan in some presentations and stuff, but I think right now there is an ability to build in some of these things that that Tom was mentioning. So the institutional agreements can be huge. So an example locally is that Chico State has done some agreements with different farmers as far as bringing in one type of produce or things like that. When I used to work at UC San Diego, we actually had a lot of these. We had an entire group that met and tried to plan out how we could use like just 10% of their budget on purchasing only local food. And like what was kind of mentioned is that once those farmers have a crop and they have that advanced payment or the partial payment, that can really benefit them. And so you're using public dollars or state or government dollars that those institutions have the ability to change and make. And you're funneling that locally, which not only helps, the local economy, but, lowers greenhouse gas emissions and all that stuff. So I'd say that's definitely one exploration to begin. But the other one is what I work in. And so I work on CalFresh. And so I help direct a program across the state related to CalFresh food, which is basically used to be called food stamps or is called SNAP federally. And I think that is really underutilized as far as being able to use those benefit dollars on CSAs and at farmers markets. We do a lot of work at farmers markets through my work, and basically every dollar that's spent at the farmers market creates $3 in economic activity. And so which is insane, basically an insane multiplier. You'll never see that return on investment anywhere else. And so Oregon and a few other places have got into CSA to SNAP benefit, where people can use their benefits to buy CSA membership and boxes. And so I see that as another way to get money to farmers so that they can do things sustainably and can feed people. That's not just the grocery store. So that when those people don't have the means to. So I think that's another way that I could see, see that unfolding, is really utilizing those, just taking advantage of those benefits rather than just continuing to go to, large corporations.
Awesome. Bryce, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, this totally doesn't align with the first point, because it's just a policy and government thing. But we need to change our policies affecting trade and subsidies to big ag. We need to eliminate subsidizing of monoculture, big agriculture, and instead help fund smaller farms and small agriculture practices, especially sustainable ones. That's all I have to add for now.
Awesome. Yeah, I would agree that policy is a big arena. I think local policy, like a right to garden, for renters and stuff like that, an active role of the city and grassroots groups identifying back 40 parts of apartment complexes, and then helping facilitate folks that live there to utilize those spaces and working with the landlord and acting basically as a liaison, and helping establish a system for managing that shared space in an apartment building would be really rad. I also think that just kind of doing a garden in your front yard, if you're able to do that right now, and then putting signs up that are you can grow your own food. This is how much money I save off my grocery bill. That would be a really great way to shift culture.
There, 1 more minute to wrap up our conversations.
Awesome. And then I also part of my vision I didn't say is micro farms. Tom, you mentioned something about only 1/8 of an acre to provide a carrot to every student every day of the school year in the county. And that's just, it makes sense, but it's a remarkable fact that we never really put much thought to. And I definitely think that facilitating, that kind of scale, the 1/8 acre, 1/4 acre scale in some of our suburban parts of the city would do great for food equity as well, especially with volatile oil prices and unemployment and other inflation and stuff. It would be good to have food being produced in a neighborhood that could then be sold, not necessarily just given away, but so that you could sell some surplus to your neighbors, to provide you a little extra income, as well as provide them good food at a low cost, without having to jump in the car and go to the Safeway. Was there any other final closing thoughts? Well, I very much appreciated this group. Thank you all for your participation.
Thanks, Steve. I've been keeping some notes, and I'm either going to paste them into the chat for people to read for our report out, or we'll figure out a way for us to report out to the broader group. Hard to go from Zoom to live. So thanks y'all for your thoughts.
All right, folks, we are at 10 minutes left in the event, so we're gonna bring it back together. I heard some great conversation on the Zoom, so thank you out there in Zoom world for participating. We did have note takers, I think, from each group. So we're gonna do just a truncated share out. We are obviously only tickling the surface of this conversation. Like this isn't even a scratch. So let's just acknowledge that up front. But I do think that there's a lot of really brilliant minds just in this room, and we all know a lot of folks that we can start to mobilize for the bigger conversation. So I'm going to hand it back over to our very well-abled MCs because I wasn't on the list for speaking tonight. Just shooting from the hip right now. And while they're figuring it out, thanks everybody for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐠𝐢𝐴, I'm Butte Environmental Council's Executive Director. I just was all over the place today, all kinds of things happening. So thank you all for coming, and this has been a really great conversation. That being said, I'm probably going to duck out right now so I can go finish up the Zoom back at the office. Okay. Because that's happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you,
Caitlin. So we're going to do a report out, including the fellows on Zoom. Every group from question 1 and then every group from question 2. So we're all in the same thoughts. So what was that?
How are we going to hear the people on Zoom?
I think they're putting it in the chat. Bryce is putting it in the chat.
Don't worry.
Let's see. So I don't have the questions anymore. Let me grab my. Don't have my paper anymore. I apologize. So our first question was visioning a resilient food system and ways to create farms, and what does our perfect ecotopia of food production, abundance, and access looks like. My group talked about why don't we just go back to what we were doing 60 years ago. With animal production locally, we need community centers. We need the yield and the scale of all of our farms to be broken down and really understood. We need different time preferences for when different foods are available. And all of these approaches are not one size fits all. We have to have willingness to really play around with our opportunities and find what works right for every farm. And also we need to promote more incentives for regenerative ag practices. Hand it to you, Brittany.
Okay. I'll look it up for you.
Boy, we kind of pictured a resilient food system as at odds to what we're currently seeing. So I immediately said lawns and golf courses. That's a lot of green space that could be put into production. But that led to common spaces. And what do we have a lot of the common spaces would be all of our roads, all of our blacktop. And so incorporating food or gardens everywhere you see blacktops, which led to thinking about all of our blacktops and roads are not permeable. And so we can look at that as a way to become more resilient, as letting the groundwater replenish instead of having pavement. And another one was, there was an example in Oroville of a class teaching people how to make pickled vegetables. And it's a skill to know when it's summer, you have an abundance of food, more than you need, but you need to store it and put it away. And there's a wisdom that we can relearn or get more people aware of how to pickle things or how to ferment things so that they'll keep and they'll feed a lot of people. And then that led us to thinking about, well, what if there is a lot of people who are hungry and they're coming at us and they're like, you have food, give it to me. Do we push people away and say, no, that's not for you, it's mine? And that whole concept of if I feel like I have enough to share, that's a better utopian place to be than hoarding and being afraid that if I don't protect what I have, somebody's going to take it because there's not enough. So that kind of was where we got into it, and I think that's enough for the food for thought. I'll stop there.
And whoever's reporting out for the next group, can you stand up here so our Zoomers can hear and see you, please?
Oh, I have to stand up? Okay.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
I am reporting out for my group, and I have scattered notes. So some of the things that we talked about is more diversity of crops. Currently, we don't have enough. No active tillage, connecting different groups. We sort of talked about the siloed groups in our food system, you know, the distribution and the processing and the actual like production of food. Land access reform with the trends of our farmers having bigger farms because that's what they were told to do and that's what they did to survive. Currently, we have issues with new farmers wanting to get into the game. And so having a land access reform and culturing regeneration, having, this is an issue, but it's also a social issue in trying to cultivate that community of a more resilient and regenerative food system, and privatizations that are tying back to the land access reform. And we had sort of two different discussions, one about education and one about systems change, and both are needed for this like bigger revisioning of our food system. But we did like the idea of the smaller farms because it sort of seems like that people can control their inputs and their outputs and their sustainability of their farms with that smaller 10-acre, but 710-acre farms, changing economic conditions.
Thank you. And then lastly, I'll be reporting out for our group on Zoom. They talked about smaller scale regenerative ag so that we're not relying on big ag, front and backyard victory gardens, lawns turned into gardens, transitioning suburbs into food forests, part with policy change and part with a culture shift that's built into our education system. And to build community where folks learn about each other and share what they grow and what they know. Decentralized, equitable distribution, neighbors coordinating so that they can cooperate and share, not necessarily producing the same things. So having neighborhood markets. It's all great.
Good job, Dan.
So from there, we'll go back through the groups for question 2, which was, what are creative ways we can start working together to address food security? So I can start out from my group. I can find my notes. We talked about having ambassadors or more connection and outreach with farmers and kind of mentorships both in the community and in the farm realm. Also talking about thinking about your health first and really having that realization for what the quality and nutritional value of your food really means for you. A connection of messaging for both caring what farmers are doing and understanding the true value of what farmers are doing, and making sure that everybody in their own homes really understands what happens behind the scenes. And also talking about once again, the seasonality of things. We don't necessarily need to walk into a supermarket and have something that is off season here and things like that. And then also making sure to spread the news or information that all of this stuff works on any size of farm. So one of the best things we can do is go around to people with a few or up to 10 or 20 acres of land and really get all of those people on board, show the progress, and then kind of attack from all sides. Get everyone on board, get more research out there, get as much data as we can out there so that we can share with everyone and show that this may not be a one-size-fits-all approach, but it's helpful no matter who's doing it. Let me see if they have their question too. Not yet. Okay, Becky, it's all you.
Okay. Our group was the best way to copy. We didn't spend as much time on the second question, but we got a lot of ideas. Community fridges, already echoing a lot of what you reported out, community food pantries, basically asking everybody to find a way to participate, jump in. And then echoing something that we heard from the speaker about incentivize, don't penalize, and making it so that we can all participate, and it's not a you have to, it's not an or else, it's a want to. And then there was a concept of there are people currently doing it, they're already doing it, but there's not enough of them. And the ones that are doing it are burning out. And so we have to figure out a way to, if you see somebody help, like find funnel funding to them. It's a classic case of a nonprofit, like constantly on the verge of not having the funding. And so they're just like, I can't get this work done and I'm burning out. And then a really cool concept of gig economy, you know, maybe taking the modern gig economy and applying it to our agriculture and not just from the store to the consumer, but beyond that, you know, try and get the farm dialed in to more than just the distribution kind of channel, but kind of make it more, you know, by demand, measured, like you were talking about, accurate with our apps, and there's not for that. It's kind of the gig economy approach to that, and what a concept that would be. And last but not least, spread awareness. So again, what you just said about getting education out there and making people aware. So yeah, thank you.
All right, Maggie, for your group.
Okay, I feel like we also talked about number one a little bit more, but for number two, having a more localized economy, reconnecting with our land and our food, also taking some knowledge and education from our indigenous communities with traditional ecological knowledge and stewarding the land and having a bigger connection than really just our food is here and we're here, thinking about the bigger ecosystem, yeah, traditional management, participatory management, and stronger connections with our communities and our food systems, showing up in support, going back to traditional ecological knowledge, as we have a great community around the Verbena Field Fridays. We're actually doing the traditional ecological knowledge, supporting local production, having farmers and incentivizing growers and having more connection. It all really came back to like really having that community connection with our local food system. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And then our Zoom group talked about the push for systemic changes so that farmers can rely on growing sustainably, setting up institutional agreements with local farmers, using public funds to support local farmers and provide sustainable income for them, which is often a big issue. Change bad trade policy and remove big ag subsidies for monocropping. School farms as both public education and demonstrative proof for sustainable production. CalFresh people should be able to use benefit money on CSAs in addition to farmers markets. And the right to garden ordinance to allow renters to garden, and assisting apartment complexes and residents to convert lawns to gardens.
Yes. Again, good
That
job,
is all fabulous. Well, great work, everybody. We're coming to the end of tonight's forum.
Government is T9 Gardens in spring and fall, but we're only doing it in spring now because the fall is too iffy to fires and all that stuff. So we'll be having 3 weekends of garden installations. We're hoping to do 100 gardens. We have a great scholarship pool this time, so I'm really excited about that. But please keep your eyes and ears open and join us. The only way that it can happen is if the community comes together. We take Fridays and construct the boxes, and then teams on Saturday and Sundays go out in with trucks and get the garden packages. This year, we're going to try and do our best to offer 2 varieties. One would be a raised bed, and then the other one will be just in the ground. We're working on that, but please join us. It's a really easy way to create more food production in our community. Credits for high school or something.
Yeah. I'm unfortunately in and out of Chico, but that just came to me.
Well, thank you, Pam. I don't really want, we're already past time, so I don't want to keep everybody if they have somewhere to go. Thank you. That's a great resource.
Volunteer team last year, that was really fun.
That's awesome. It's really good to know what's going on already. So I want to thank Grub for hosting us tonight in their barn. I want to thank all of our panelists again. Pam, Cindy, Jared, Eric, and Maria.
Yay.
And I want to let you guys know about a few events that BEC has coming up. So our member mixer is happening December 10th at Day Camp Coffee. This is an annual party to thank our BEC members who support us and keep our community forum program running. So if you're interested in becoming a BEC member or angel, please visit us at the BEC booth on your way out or online at becnet.org. And that concludes the final community forum of this year. So I hope you guys all had a good time, whether you're in person or on Zoom, and that you'll keep an eye out for our calendar and see what's happening next year. And feel free to stick around if you would like to keep talking or clean up, and safe travels to those of you who will not be sticking around, or to all of you at some point. And please sign up for our volunteer list and information list on your way out, so you can get some more information on what we have going on and stay involved.
We also have the gardening committee that we were listening to.
We do.
But we have a committee started and do cool stuff.
Yeah, Beck. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. I also was supposed to say that Grub has spots available in their CSA. So if anybody's like, no, I want to come back out here and get food next week, you can sign up for that.
Yeah.
All right.